What makes a great story? The very first thing it must do is stir our emotions. While a story should make sense, we're not meant to understand it the way we understand arithmetic. We are meant to feel it. The more complex question then becomes, how does a story make us feel something? One of the main ways is by presenting to us something, or someone, that we can relate to. This could be Christian Bale in American Psycho, or Ryan Gosling in Drive. He's literally me, the chronically online Chud will say, utterly disassociated from reality. Or it could be much more subtle, say for instance with the film Ratatouille. Yes, it is a story about a rodent that is an excellent chef that is trying to garner acceptance within a French restaurant, but it is because of the nuanced motivations and struggles of said rodent that the story becomes interesting and relatable. Could an excellent human chef not struggle with the same plight? Why, he very well could, but it would be much less interesting to watch. Even though the main character is a rat, the impact of the story is not lost. In fact, anthropomorphic animals are very common in animated storytelling and work to great effect. Having a character or motivation that is transformed into something other than its real-world counterpart, because we can still make the link between a fantastical story and our own lives. One such fantastical story is Over the Garden Wall. On the surface, Over the Garden Wall is a story about a pair of brothers lost in the woods. But of course, they are no ordinary brothers, nor are they lost in an ordinary forest. No, just like most cartoons, everything in their story is exaggerated. Not only the magical elements, like say a talking bird or a school for animals, but the archetypes of its characters. Animated stories always seem to create a world greater than life, saturated and rich, yet no matter how fantastical they are, they never feel unrealistic, because oftentimes humans need to see an extreme, a polar representation of something to understand it, something brighter than reality. And that's why children, with their vivid imaginations, enjoy cartoons so much, because they portray a world that exists within the child's mind already. But a great story, even if it's animated, can be appreciated by children and adults alike. And Over the Garden Wall is a great story, not only because of the narrative on the surface, but because of everything that is concealed underneath, that necessitates an observant mind to notice it. Whether it is the archetypes of the characters or the symbolism we see in the story, it is ripe for contemplation. Much like how Ratatouille is not merely a story about a rat, so is Over the Garden Wall not merely a story about two brothers, but it is much more. The brothers are certainly one of the most compelling attributes of the story, especially because of what they represent. From the very start of the series, we sense the vast contrast between them. Wirt is neurotic and anxious. Upon having to face a problem, he immediately falls into a panic state, whilst his little brother Greg is juvenile and carefree, Wirt's polar opposite. Whatever trouble may befall the duo, Greg remains unfazed. The pair act as a metaphor for certain traits that we develop as we mature. Greg is the younger brother and represents an archetype of childlike wonder and assertiveness. He dashes into situations fearlessly without a second thought, whilst older brother Wirt exemplifies anxiety and unassertiveness, traits that often first appear in adolescence and we misinterpret as virtues of becoming a grown-up. Greg is the instinct, the drive. We see how he is constantly pushing forward. He is curious and asserts himself onto the forest, whilst Wirt acts as a handbrake for Greg. He oftentimes chastises him for being so careless, acting so fast, being so unbothered, for not worrying. Couldn't many of us relate to such a tension within our own psyche, possessing a childlike side that is confident and assertive, yet finding ourselves rebuking that part of us, suppressing it out of fear? Because many of us likely associate the neurotic and anxious side of our brain with the intelligent and conscious part of us. But how come? What can be so positive about a psychological handbrake? Should we not relate more with the part of us that wants to move us forward? Even as I'm writing this is at play inside my mind. There's a side that wants to write one thing and another that says, that's stupid, don't write that, don't embarrass yourself. And that's what this handbrake is in most cases, a social defense mechanism, to not embarrass ourselves in front of the wolf pack. But we must earnestly ask ourselves, is this instinct doing us more harm than good? The social handbrake we possess is designed to protect our reputation, keep us liked by our peers. Yet how often does it hold us back from achieving our full potential, constantly scared of social repercussions? This is exactly the situation that Wirt finds himself in. Throughout the series, Wirt is constantly lamenting about his lost love, how the girl he likes doesn't like him back, and how she's probably with that no-good Jason Thunderberger. The way that Wirt talks about himself and this seemingly failed romance even makes Beatrice think that he's a loser, even though in the unknown, his actions make him look like a hero. And we, as viewers, also begin to view Wirt in this way. He acts so very unassertive and anxious that we are led to believe that he probably doesn't have many friends, and that he's a bit of a loner. In the 9th episode, Into the Unknown, this is all flipped on its head, since we get to see Wirt's actual life back home. Many of us were led to believe that Jason Thunderburger was some sort of tall and handsome jock who had stolen the beautiful cheerleader from Wirt, the awkward nerd. And yet this is so very far from the truth, as in fact, Wirt is actually very well liked by his friends, Sarah included, whilst Jason Thunderburger is actually closer to being the awkward nerd. And this whole juxtaposition works because it illustrates to us that Wirt is only a loser inside his own head. His mindscape creates this anxiety that paralyzes him. The way he negatively speaks of himself even influences others' opinions. Wirt's story is that of overcoming his neuroticism and learning to assert himself. And that is what his time in the unknown teaches him. In the final episode, when Greg and Wirt are falling into the depths of the river, on the verge of life and death, Wirt opens his eyes and saves them both. This is the antithesis of the weak and unassertive Wirt from the beginning of the show. With the confidence he has gained throughout his time in the unknown, he can finally impose his will and save his brother's life. Greg's character, on the other hand, is not one that must develop, but rather one that must be conserved, because his way of viewing the world, once lost, can never again be acquired. Greg is the epitome of the saying, ignorance is bliss, for it is because of his naivete that he can afford to be so assertive, whilst Wirt, due to his intelligence, becomes trapped in analysis paralysis. And this is where the Jungian theme of individuation begins to appear, for both Wirt and Greg lie on two polar ends and must learn to integrate the other, to have an auspicious life. Greg's confrontation with this other side comes to a head in episode 8, Babes in the Wood, when Wirt abandons his post as the older brother and goes off to sleep, thrusting onto Greg the responsibility that Wirt had previously carried. For Greg, this comes through a dream, where he makes a wish to the Queen of the Clouds to be able to go home with Wirt. Even though Greg retained his positive, childish outlook, wanting to save his brother and himself, the Queen sadly informs him that it is too late for Wirt. This is the most important moment for Greg's character development, as he says to himself, "I should have been leading better, and I was goofing off like always." The Queen grants Greg a wish, and it is implied that Greg wishes to take Wirt's place, to save him from the beast. A remarkable amount of maturity for a young child to muster, to be willing to sacrifice himself, to take responsibility for his own perceived shortcomings. With this action, Greg ceases to be a silly little kid, though he still is of course, but he's not only that, since he shows that when it is necessary, he can take responsibility and be serious himself. For both brothers, there comes this moment where they prove to themselves that they can individuate their character, that Wirt isn't only an anxious and unconfident teenager, and that Greg isn't a silly kid who only goofs about, but that they can take the best parts of themselves and of each other and integrate it within their personality. What these two kids within an animated story accomplish, many fail to manage during their entire lives, clinging to their poor personality traits and not having the assertiveness to integrate that which is good yet unfamiliar within their character, learning from the good of others and from the weaknesses within themselves. And right at the end, when Wirt is confronted about the tape he has made for Sarah, we can see these two sides of him clash, and him taking control of both, not being led by his fear and anxiety like before. He now boldly proclaims that she can listen to it with him. He is not ashamed that he likes her, yet he still possesses the foresight to advise that they don't begin with exactly that tape. The psychology of Greg and Wirt is a reminder of just how many of man's issues are internal, and that until you don't resolve your inner strife and reconcile your conflicting personality traits, you can seldom find peace or achieve what you want, because it is yourself that is really holding you back. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I really appreciate you for sticking around. This is one of my favorite animated shows. I recently got the chance to rewatch it with my girlfriend, so I really wanted to make a video that tackled some of these really deep themes that no one would think would be an animated show, but they are, and that's why it's so remarkable that there's almost Jungian themes present in a children's show. But I mean, there you have it. It's why it's so good. That's why people continue coming back to it, and that's probably why you watch this video. And yeah, thanks for making it to the end. That's really the most that I can ask for. If you like the video, be sure to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I have a Discord server you can join down below if you want. And yeah, Thank you for sticking around, it means the world to me. I'll see you in the next one.